Did you tell the grand jury that Donald Trump had declassified those documents? It's the question everyone wants answered, and the one Kash Patel can't answer publicly. Behind closed doors, Patel has already been forced to talk under oath about some of the most sensitive moments of Donald Trump's post-presidency, how classified material left the White House, how it ended up at Mar-a-Lago, and what Trump actually believed about declassification. And while we still don't have that transcript, we do know this. The Justice Department thought his testimony was important enough to give him immunity, and Donald Trump did not take that lightly. I'm Jack Whitmore, and you're watching National Affairs Media. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss our deep dives on the legal and political battles reshaping the country. Today, we're unpacking how Kash Patel, one of Trump's most loyal lieutenants, became a compelled witness in the classified documents case, why prosecutors went to such lengths to get his testimony, and how Trump has reacted as more of his inner circle is drawn into the courtroom spotlight. Let's lay out the stakes here. Donald Trump is charged in federal court in Florida for allegedly mishandling classified documents after leaving office and obstructing efforts to get them back. He has pleaded not guilty and insists the entire case is a political hit job. From the beginning, one of Trump's main talking points has been simple. He says he had the authority to declassify anything he took, and that whatever sat in boxes at Mar-a-Lago was his to keep. That's where Kash Patel comes in. Patel isn't some fringe hanger-on. He's been at the center of Trump's world for years. He rose to prominence as a top aide to Republican Congressman Devin Nunes during the early fights over the Russia investigation, helping to draft the infamous memo accusing the FBI of abusing surveillance powers. Trump noticed. By the end of Trump's term, Patel had cycled through influential roles, senior positions at the National Security Council, then chief of staff at the Defense Department. He was the kind of aide Trump favors, aggressive on television, fiercely loyal, and willing to wage war on what they both described as the deep state. After Trump left office, Patel got another important assignment. Trump designated him as one of his representatives to the National Archives on issues involving presidential records and classified information. In other words, when questions arose about what Trump had taken from the White House and whether it should be returned, Patel was on the short list of people in the loop. So, when the FBI found troves of documents marked classified at Mar-a-Lago in August 2022, it was no surprise that Kash Patel suddenly started appearing on conservative media offering a very specific defense. He repeatedly claimed that while in office, Trump had issued a broad declassification order covering any materials he took with him. In those interviews, Patel painted a picture of a president who had proactively stripped the documents of classification, suggesting that what the FBI seized in Florida were basically keepsakes, not secrets. For Trump, that was political gold. An insider with national security credentials backing his story on camera. For federal prosecutors, it was a flashing red light. If that sweeping declassification order really existed, they needed to see the paperwork, the process, the witnesses who could confirm it. If it didn't exist, then a former senior official was going on TV pushing a narrative that could confuse potential jurors and muddy the case. So the Justice Department did what it does in serious cases involving powerful people. It went straight to the source. In 2022, federal prosecutors subpoenaed Kash Patel to testify before a grand jury in Washington, D.C., the same grand jury hearing evidence about Trump's handling of classified records. When Patel arrived, he didn't sit down and eagerly answer questions. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to testify on key topics. Legally, that tells you two important things. First, his answers could have exposed him to potential criminal liability, or at least his lawyers thought they might. You don't take the Fifth just to be dramatic. Second, prosecutors believed he had information that mattered, enough to fight him in court rather than simply move on to the next witness. That's exactly what they did. The Justice Department went to Chief Judge Beryl Howell, who oversaw the grand juries in D.C., and asked for an immunity order. Let's pause on that, because it's one of the most powerful and least understood tools in the federal system. There are different flavors of immunity, but what prosecutors sought here is often called use and derivative use immunity. It means this. Anything Kash Patel says under that grant of immunity and any evidence investigators uncover because of what he says cannot be used directly against him in a criminal case. It does not give him a blanket promise that he'll never be charged with anything in his life. But it does remove the immediate risk that his answers about the Mar-a-Lago situation will land him in handcuffs. Once a judge approves that kind of immunity, the game changes. The Fifth Amendment no longer applies to those questions. Patel can't refuse to answer on self-incrimination grounds. If he continues to stay silent or lies, he's looking at contempt of court or perjury. So after Judge Howell granted the immunity request, Kash Patel came back and testified before the grand jury. We don't have that transcript. Grand jury proceedings are secret by design. There's no public recording we can just pull up and play. But based on court filings and extensive reporting, we can make some educated guesses about where prosecutors focused. They would have wanted detailed accounts of how boxes of material were packed and moved when Trump left the White House, who decided what went to Mar-a-Lago and what went to the National Archives, what conversations Patel had with Trump or other aides about classified material, and crucially, what, if anything, Patel knew about a supposed blanket declassification order. Remember, this is the same person who had gone on television assuring viewers that Trump had declassified a whole set of documents before leaving office. Under oath, that kind of broad soundbite doesn't cut it. Prosecutors would have pressed for specifics. When was the order issued? Who witnessed it? Were agencies notified? Is there written documentation? How did it actually work in practice? Legal experts who followed the case closely point out that this is exactly how the Justice Department tests public claims. They don't argue about them on cable news. They bring witnesses into a grand jury room, put them under oath, and start drilling down until the facts or the gaps become clear. So where does Donald Trump's reaction come in? Even before Patel's immunity became public, Trump had been raging against the investigation. He labeled the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago a raid, cast the case as a witch hunt, and insisted he was the victim of a weaponized Justice Department. The news that prosecutors had gone so far as to immunize one of his closest allies only intensified that narrative. From Trump's perspective, this wasn't just about documents. It was about the government putting pressure on his people, the loyalists who stuck with him after January 6th, after 2 impeachments after he left office. In speeches and social media posts, Trump has repeatedly portrayed these kinds of moves as an effort to break his allies, to scare anyone from serving in a future administration, and to turn insiders into tools of what he calls the deep state. He has used the same framing as other former advisors, aides, and lawyers have been pulled into investigations. Prosecutors, in his telling, are threatening good people in order to get to him. Now, it's important to be precise here. Unlike some former advisors, Kash Patel has not publicly broken with Trump. There's been no high-profile feud between the two, no public name-calling back and forth. In fact, Patel has remained generally supportive of Trump in his public appearances. But the idea that someone that close, someone Trump trusted with national security issues and post-presidency records, was compelled to testify under immunity, clearly unnerved Trump's political operation. You can see it in the way they talk about the case. Trump's lawyers and surrogates have leaned even harder into the declassification narrative, insisting that a president's authority over classified information is so broad that he effectively cannot commit a crime by taking documents with him. They've repeatedly invoked the Presidential Records Act, despite the fact that numerous legal scholars, including conservative ones, have pointed out that it does not give a former president personal ownership of classified national security documents. Politically, Trump has folded developments like Patel's testimony into a broader storyline he uses at rallies and in fundraising, that the Justice Department is being used as a political weapon to interfere with his campaign and punish people who worked for him. In that sense, Kash Patel's time before the grand jury didn't just matter legally. It became part of the fuel for Trump's ongoing argument that the system is stacked against him. Let's talk about why prosecutors were willing to take the risk of immunizing such a loyalist in the first place. Granting immunity is always a strategic calculation. You give up the potential to charge that person in exchange for what you hope will be truthful, useful testimony against someone higher up the chain. In organized crime cases, that might mean flipping an underboss to get to the boss. In political corruption cases, it might mean immunizing staffers to build a case against the elected official. Here, federal investigators decided that what Kash Patel knew as a senior national security aide and designated records representative was significant enough that they were willing to remove his Fifth Amendment shield. It also tells you something else. By the time they sought that immunity, prosecutors likely had other evidence in hand, documents, emails, testimony from different witnesses that they believed could corroborate or contradict whatever Patel said. That's critical because immunity doesn't protect you from perjury. If an immunized witness lies, the government can still prosecute them for lying, using their own false statements as evidence. So the more independent evidence investigators have, the more confident they can be about catching any attempts to shade the truth. From Trump's vantage point, that's a serious threat. The more people inside his orbit who are compelled to testify under these conditions, the less control he has over what version of events ends up in the record. Even if those witnesses are personally loyal, they're staring at a hard choice. Protect the boss with a story that might not fit the evidence and risk perjury, or tell the truth as they remember it and let the political chips fall where they may. Trump's response to that dynamic has followed a familiar pattern. Publicly, he doubles down, insisting that those around him did nothing wrong, that any investigative tactic is unfair or unconstitutional, and that the real crime is the investigation itself. Privately, according to multiple reports about other cases, he keeps close tabs on who has been called, who has hired which lawyers, and who might be cooperating. Prosecutors in different Trump-related cases have even raised concerns about potential witness intimidation, pointing to public comments that could be read as warnings to people thinking of turning on him. To be clear, in the Mar-a-Lago documents case, we have not seen the kind of explosive public break between Trump and Kash Patel that we've seen with some other former associates. There's no evidence Patel has become an antagonist. But Trump's broader reaction to his allies being dragged into grand juries, including Patel, has been loud and sustained. The system is corrupt, the prosecutors are thugs, and he is the ultimate victim. Legally, though, that rhetoric doesn't change the fundamentals. The classified documents case will turn on evidence. What's in the boxes, how they were moved, what Trump was told by his lawyers and aides, what steps he took after receiving subpoenas and requests to return material. Kash Patel's testimony is just one piece of that puzzle, but an unusually sensitive one given his background and proximity to the decision-making. If this case goes to trial, prosecutors are likely to call a series of witnesses who can walk jurors through the paper trail and the timeline, employees who moved boxes, lawyers who negotiated with the government, agents who executed the search warrant. Whether Patel appears in that lineup as a trial witness or remains a figure whose words are known only to prosecutors and defense attorneys, his grand jury appearance has already shaped the contours of the case. At a minimum, it gave the Justice Department direct access to someone who had publicly defended Trump's declassification claims, served at the top levels of his national security and defense apparatus, and been named by Trump himself to help negotiate over presidential records. That's exactly the kind of insider account investigators look for when they're trying to test a former president's public narrative against the underlying facts. For Trump, that reality has fueled a more emotional, hard-edged response, not just to the documents case, but to the idea that anyone in his orbit can be compelled to speak. He has warned over and over that what's happening to him could happen to anyone who dares to challenge the establishment. It's a way of turning legal setbacks into political energy, of recasting immunized testimony from former aides as proof of a broader conspiracy. Whether voters buy that story is a separate question. Some see the Justice Department's moves, including the decision to immunize Kash Patel, as necessary to hold a former president accountable for how he handled national secrets. Others accept Trump's framing, viewing every subpoena and grand jury as just another chapter in a long-running war between him and what he calls the Washington swamp. Here's where things stand as of now. The federal classified documents case against Donald Trump remains unresolved. Trump continues to proclaim his innocence, to insist that he had every right to keep the material he kept, and to describe the prosecutors as political operatives. Kash Patel, meanwhile, sits in a uniquely precarious position. A public defender of Trump's story who has also spoken under oath behind closed doors under a grant of immunity that stripped away his Fifth Amendment shield. We don't yet know exactly what he told the grand jury. We may not know unless his testimony becomes relevant at trial and is introduced in open court. But we do know this. Prosecutors believed his words mattered enough to fight for them, and Donald Trump's response shows just how threatening he views that kind of insider testimony. At the end of the day, this case, like so many surrounding Trump, is about more than one man's legal fate. It's about whether the justice system can compel truth from powerful people and those around them, even when the political costs are enormous. And Kash Patel's journey from combative TV surrogate to immunized grand jury witness is a stark reminder of how narrow that path can become. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who's trying to make sense of the legal and political fallout around the Trump documents case. Let me know in the comments. Do you think compelled testimony from Trump's inner circle will ultimately matter more in court or in the court of public opinion? I'll see you in the next one.